All right, so I'm going to be replicating this graph here from Catherine Mulbrandon. I think she runs this website, Visualizing Economics, um, in Playfair. And this is actually a pretty simple graph, but the reason I kind of like it is because it'll show off how easy it is to do some of this shading and labeling in Playfair. All right, so I got the data from this website, measuringworth.com. I'm going to jump over to that. So here's the data year. There's the GDP per capita in the US since 1871. And then I hopped into R to fit an exponential function to this data to give us a trend line. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how we can get this data ready for Playfair. And if you're familiar with ggplot2, then you've probably done this kind of thing. The way that Playfair wants to have data is it wants to have data that's long instead of wide. And so this is kind of an Excel setup right now where if I wanted to graph this thing, I'd highlight these rows and I'd say make me a line graph, and it would have year on the x-axis, and then it would have two lines, one for the GDP and one for trend. Well, to do this in Playfair, what you need to do is convert this into a long format and show you what I mean by that. I'm going to copy all this trend data, and I'm just going to put it down here below, whoops, I'm going to paste the values. I'm probably going to need to copy this again. So I'm going to put it down here below the y variable. And if you think about it, right, this is all y variable. I mean, it kind of makes sense to stack these things because we're really just plotting two lines with the same x variable and the same y variable. And then as you can see, I'm also stacking the year here. And so now this year corresponds to the correct fitted estimate from the exponential, from the trend. Anyway, that's not a big deal. This is a little bit more of a complicated trend than you might normally need. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a type, and I'm going to call this one GDP per capita. So I'm essentially giving a label to this line, which is going to be this black line that's showing the actual GDP, and then I'm going to call this one trend line and copy that down. Okay, so that's the data. Let me grab this real quick. I'm going to come over to Playfair and just paste that in. Actually, before I do that, let me reformat this. This doesn't matter too much, but okay, so I'm gonna come over here, paste that in. Okay, and what you'll see after you paste in data is that Playfair tries to kind of figure it out. And so it says the year column has 290 observations, and I think it's numeric. Same with the GDP column, and then the type column, it correctly identifies as text, right? There's just the GDP per capita and trend line in here. Now, in this case, you'll notice it identified this year column as being numeric. That's because Playfair doesn't get too aggressive when all you have is the year. If we put like 01-01-1871, it would know that that's a date. But right now it thinks this is just a number. So I'm going to force it to parse that as a date, right? So I just do that drop-down menu and pick date. All right. Let's go over to chart then. This is a line chart, or well, the geom we're going to be adding right now is lines. And the x variable is the year. The y variable is that GDP variable. And then to get this grouping, to create two lines, I need to tell it what category to group on. And in this case, I want it to make the lines different colors. So I'm going to pick type, and I'm going to hit redraw. Right? So there's our trend line. There's our GDP line. You can see we have a little key that we can drag around. And they're different colors. I could have done this a couple of different ways. So instead of doing this on a line color, I could have picked line type. I could have told it to make them different types, and then you see I get one of them is solid and one of them is dotted. All right, but I'm going to stick with color. So let's put that back how it was. Now, the second really significant feature of this graph is that she has these shaded intervals, and most of them are, well, all of them but one are wars. She has mostly wars, and then the Great Depression is labeled. I went ahead and prepared this ahead of time, so I'm just going to copy this, and then I'll show you what it means. So this is essentially another charting element, and so I can just hop over here to shading, and you can do a couple things with shading in Playfair. The first thing is you can just get US recessions automatically, and so if I just turn this slider on and I redraw this, there's all the US recessions since 1871, and so there's quite a lot of them here. But I don't want that in this case. I want to imitate the original graph, which had the wars in it and then the Great Depression. So let me paste this string in here, and what I'm doing, so this is vertical shading, right, meaning that it runs up and down. It's shading on the x-axis basically. And what I did was I just gave it the start and end dates of each of these events, and I put them in brackets. And so the first event was the Spanish-American War, which Wikipedia tells me went from April 1st, 1898 to September 1st, 1898. So I just put that range in brackets, and so on and so forth, all the way up to, this is the Iraq War, which began March 20th, 2003, and then I just put December 30th, 2015 on here because that's going to run basically to the end of the graph. Now if I hit redraw, there are those events. Okay. So we got that. I'm going to do a couple design things real quick. First of all, she has a headline on this here, which I'm just going to copy. Okay. And she has a subhead. All right. So that gives us that. You notice this key keeps coming back. One thing you have to know about Playfair is that when you redraw, you're essentially resetting it to whatever you have up here. And so I can move this key around, but every time I hit redraw, it's going to pop it back over there. Now what I can do, because I think ultimately I'm not going to want a key on this graph, like she just wrote trend line here, which is fine. And I think it's pretty obvious from the subhead what this series is. So I'm just going to come over here to Legend, and you can do a bunch of stuff in Legend, but for our purposes right now what matters is this preview. You can see preview matches up to the key that's actually drawn. So for example, it's telling me that there's going to be a line, and the type is GDP per capita, and then there's going to be a line, and the type is trend line, and then there's going to be shade with no label. You can actually add that in the shading tab if you want to. But I actually don't want a key at all. So I'm just going to X all these out. Now if I redraw, I have no key. All right, I'm also going to, in this design tab here, I'm going to get rid of the logo. Let's just draw on the whole graph. This is how you would change a theme if this was a hosted version of Playfair that actually had all that available. But this is my, my version that I have hosted on my website, which does not have that enabled. Okay, and the other thing is I want to play with the axes a little. This is a matter of personal preference, but I'm just going to show you some different ways you can do this. So right now I have really sparse year axes. By default, Playfair tends to like having relatively few ticks. And the other thing that I think is a little weird about how it is right now is it runs way over, right? So it runs to 2021, even though my data only goes to 2015. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn on the custom x-axis value here. And actually, while I'm here, I'll turn on the X grid lines because she uses them. We'll see how that looks. That might not look great. And I'm going to change them a little. So instead of going from, where does she go from? She goes from 1880 to 2000. But of course, I'm doing more data. So I'm going to start with 1870. And then I'm going to do this in 20-year increments. So our next thing will be 1890. And then we'll have 1910. And we'll have 1930. I'm just pasting here. We'll have 1950. Then we'll have 1970. Whoops. Then we'll have 1990. And then we'll have 2010, and I'm going to stop there, and I'll show you why. So let's go ahead and redraw this and just see what we've done. So first of all, those X grid lines are too heavy in this theme. They look kind of awful, so I'm going to turn that back off. But then the other thing that's wrong here, right, is that our data runs to 2015, and I stopped at 2010, and so our data is now running off the graph. So I'm also going to throw X limits on here. And what you do here is you just tell it where you want the graph to start and stop, irrespective of the ticks. And so this is going to start at 1870, and then I can end it anywhere I want. So I'm going to end it at the beginning of 2016. And now my data is nicely encapsulated by the graph. All right. So I like this so far. And I think that's all I want to do in design. We could put a source on this if we wanted. But she has a Y label, so I'll go ahead and put a Y label on that. I don't know that it's strictly necessary here because this subhead kind of tells you what's up. In fact, I'm not going to bother. I think most people will understand this. Now, looking at her graph, there's a couple other things we might want to do. She shades the Great Depression a little differently. So this is... I had to pop out real quick because I realized that this was an older version of Playfair that still has a bug related to shading in it. So what I was wanting to do was show you how we could recolor the Great Depression here like Catherine has on her graph. So that's pretty easy. This is the Great Depression. We just right click on this. You notice we have a bunch of options now. And what I'm going to do is I am going to just recolor this to a darker shade of gray, which I think looks all right. If you were really putting a lot of time into this, I think given the amount of shading and the fact that there's overlapping shading on this and whatnot, it'd really probably look better to do this against a white background. And we could do that either by theming Playfair or by just hopping over into the settings and changing that setting. So for example, you can see that's the chart fill right there. And so if we just changed this to 2000, oh, that's black. Yeah, sorry. We could do that easily enough. Now I'd also have to change some of the parameters for shading because the shading on the gray is just white, which obviously isn't going to show up now. But I'm going to go back to what I have. So this is just using the default theme. One other thing I just noticed is that in Catherine's chart, we have the GDP line always crosses on top, I think, of the trend line. And mine is actually crossing behind. So I can right click on that and say move to front. And now the GDP line is always crossing on top. So you can do a lot of stuff on the graph just by right clicking. And we're going to see some more of that. First I want to mess with the axes a little. So you notice these are probably not formatted the way you want them to be formatted. So we could do it like that. I kind of prefer to just do this kind of thing. But I'll go ahead and put the full text in there. usually works a little better in Playfair if you do changes of magnitude before you input the data. So if I input the data, it's just like if I just divided everything by 1,000, that'd probably be a little better. But as it is, I'm going to leave it in these numbers, and I'm just going to add a little there. Okay, so we're getting a little closer now. Now the other like really big thing that stands out about this graph that she made is that we have lots of annotations on the graph. So I'm going to do the simple one first. I'm going to annotate this trend line. So I can right click and say add text. You notice hers was colored, so I'm going to color mine too. I'm going to pick the same color as that line. And then if I double click on the text, I can edit it as if I was in a text editor. That's not entirely true. I can't go back and forth. Well, I can go back and forth, but I can't like select things in here and stuff. But I can do lots of other stuff. So I did that. I'm going to go ahead and make it bold. You'll notice that their little help box shows up over here that tells you what you can do. So I'm going to hit Control B, and maybe I'll also just hit up a couple times to make that bigger. I think that looks pretty good. You might want to play with the positioning of that. There's an awful lot going on this chart. But I'm fairly happy with that. Okay. So that gets the trend line labeled. Now the other thing she does is she labels some specific years. I'm not going to label 1871 because I think it's more clear in my graph where that starts. But I'll go ahead and label some of these shaded regions. So how would you do that? Well, again, you can just say add text, and we can say Spanish-American War. Now to really make this look good, we might have to make this a little smaller, and we might have to, I just hit return, so I got that. Maybe I'll put that on the left side there, right? This part, obviously, you'll just have to decide how you want everything to look, but something like that. I could also do it like this, maybe. Okay, so we are going to be putting a lot of text on a fairly small area. You notice her graph is a lot bigger than mine. If you wanted to get a bigger graph, what you could do is you could go to Design, go to Style, and you could change these pixel values. So right now, this graph is exactly 745 pixels wide and 520 pixels tall, but I could alter that just by putting those values in here and hitting redraw. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and keep labeling these. I don't know that I'll label all of them, but I'll label a few of them. I forgot I lost my depression shading. If you really wanted to sort of duplicate what she has here. Now again, her x-axis is more stretched out, so she has a lot more room right here. But we could add text, and then we could make it white so that it would be seen on that black background, but we'd probably need a more stretched out x-axis. So instead, I'm just going to kind of decoratively throw some things on here. I definitely want to label the Great Depression, and I'm probably again going to have to put a return in there. I really want to have the ability to write align text. At some point, Playfair will be able to do that. What else can I do here? I can put World War I in. So I'm going to add text and say World War I. That one's pretty easy to place. We can, I guess, go ahead and label World War II maybe. Whoops. And again, you can do various things here. So we can make these smaller, we can make these larger, you can make them bold. You can nudge them by holding Shift and then pressing a direction. All right. So we get a little better there. Now she also has some particular events sort of picked out here. Now there's a couple ways you could do this. She's not using shading, right? So like this is a 73 to 74 event, but she just kind of has it over the approximate area. So we could do some of that. So like for the 1929 stock crash, that's right here. You'll notice that my trend line is a little different than hers. And so her trend line is really hitting the stock crash a little closer, whereas mine is below it. But we could do that again. I should probably be using a larger canvas, but that's okay. We can make that bold like she does. I might have to move these. You can sort of free drag text once you've selected it. And I'll go ahead and put it in 3 lines like she does, so it's maybe a little more clear that this is referring to that. If you wanted, you could also put arrows or callouts or things like that. So, for example, what's another one of these? We have the internet stock bubble here. So that's kind of this run up here. So let's say I wanted to label that and I didn't have a lot of room. I could say start path, and then I could draw to wherever I want my text to be. That's going to put a little call out thing here, and then I could put that the internet stock bubble right there. Or if you prefer, we could do it with an arrow. So you could say start arrow, and then just click to end that arrow, and you could have some text here. Or probably you would want to draw the arrow the other way around, right? Okay, and I can delete that. All right, so I think I've hit most of the major things here. I'm not going to label everything. I think you can kind of see how that would work. And since I don't have a lot of space here, I'm going to have trouble making it kind of work as well as she has here. This is actually a really wide graphic. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how you would make this graphic. If you had Playfair deployed, you could save this, come back and edit it later. I can go ahead and download it as a PNG right now. I will put that on my blog. You could also download it as an SVG. 2 reasons you might want to do this. First of all, you could put this directly into your web page if you just want to have an SVG there, because then it would be resolution independent. But you could also open that SVG in something like Adobe Illustrator or another vector editing program if you wanted to manually make changes to whatever Playfair gives you.